I'm not going anywhere near it.
Get over there and push, or I'll eat you and your little friend, too.
You're insane. It'll eat us all if we let it out.
And I'll eat you all if you don't.
Welcome to the Caffeinated Gamers, where we talk about board games, role-playing games, and today D&D 5e, and today DM tips. So we really want to take some time and talk about ways to make your encounters better. So one of the things that I love to do in encounters is give them a time frame, give them something that's going to occur that is visible, that is noticeable, that they know is coming to them, and the characters are trying to stop. It adds that bit of suspense in combat. So that little snippet that we listened to at the beginning of the video was an idea of mine where this was a second level campaign where the main bad guy was a Hydra. So the characters were all second level. We only had 3 of the characters that were there out of the 5. And the Hydra was the ticking time bomb. So what it was a group of goblins and bugbears that were pushing a cage out of their stronghold and into where the players had made their stronghold. So it was a time bomb of where that cage was at, or whether the goblins and bugbears had a chance to open the cage. I made it very apparent of where the lock and the mechanism to open the cage was, and it wasn't just a one round open. That way, if the characters started to see this, it took 3 actions for them to open the cage, because there were 3 very large bars. Now, if the cage was opened, the characters had the ability to run away, and then the Hydra would turn on the goblins and bugbears. So I had a plan that just in case they were still dealing with this Hydra, they wouldn't be demolished. So when I'm creating encounters and I have the ticking time bomb, it's usually something that's very visible. The characters know what's going to happen if that opens. So another one that I had was, I like to use cages a lot in strongholds where they're usually holding some abomination or some monster that is going to cause devastation to the player characters, such as raising a portcullis, right? If someone's over there raising it and the characters kill that person, it falls back shut. And so their focus is on that in addition to just the combat at hand. It makes combat a little more interesting. I also have done things where I've added like a pylon or something that actually creates an effect. And if you stay outside of the effect, it creates one effect, and then there's another pylon. So by moving between the pylons, you can create different effects and different status effects that will affect the characters and the evildoers differently. Now, a lot of this comes from my years of playing World of Warcraft and where status effects and where your positioning on the battlefield are. The thing is when you're doing this, you can't take a video game style approach. Because if you do, in a video game, if you die, what do? You restart. You start back at the start of the dungeon. You respawn. You go back to your body. Any of those things. In our scenario, when we're dealing with D&D players, we have to make sure that they know what's going on, and we have to give them a way to retreat. Putting someone in a box with a certain way to beat that specific puzzle and combat and not allowing them to retreat to figure out what's going on is kind of a rough patch. One of the first times I ever tried this, I had a spot where the characters zoned into a different area. It was a temple that actually allowed them to travel through time. Once again, video game references, try to figure out which video game that is. And what I found was, as the characters went in, they were introduced to the combat. And they had no rhyme or reason of what that combat was going to look like. They didn't know what the mechanics of that fight were. And so I had to give them a way to bounce out as well. So with that fight, they were able to leave and come back in, and it was reset because we were dealing with time travel. This was my first attempt at it, and so I allowed the players to go in and out of this fight. Now, getting out of the fight was something in itself, because there was a force that every turn, if you didn't make a dex save, would pull you back towards the center of the room. The problem is I made that force all the way to the exit point. So one of the characters, which had a very low dex, struggled tremendously to escape that. All of his colleagues had left him and couldn't go back in because he hadn't made it out yet. So I created this catch-22 of the fight to where everyone is around the table and suspensefully waiting for him to get out, which didn't look like he was going to do because there was a golem inside that was beating on him the entire time, causing his hit points to dwindle down to nothing. Now, on the other side of this, I allowed the characters to take short rests, long rests. There was very little danger on the other side. I didn't really like how the mechanics played out because it felt very much like a video game. If you were failing, you left. If you were failing, you left. And then when you started to succeed, you stayed and finished the fight. So there were some things about that and the way that it worked that left a lot to be desired. So from that point forward, when the characters were doing research on the fight, I would sometimes take and put a ticking time bomb or give hints that this is what the creatures had captured or had, and they had a big bad, or they had this power, but it took this to do. There was lots of those little bitty things that I would give to the players so they knew what they were walking into when they went into that fight. If the players were going into a blind fight or a blind encounter, then I made sure that there was no mechanics that they couldn't figure out or see easily. And a lot of times I would tell the players outright, you see a goblin run over to cage and start lifting up this portcullis, and behind it you see a giant three-headed beast, right? You give the players something that they can do. In most cases, what's behind or that big bad that I'm introducing or that ticking time bomb simply makes the encounter harder. In the case of my second level characters and the Hydra that was being pushed out of the Goblin and Bugbear stronghold, that was one of those things where if the players chose to stay, they would die. Now, in that campaign I had set up, there will be encounters that you cannot overcome, and that staying and fighting is not a good thing. I laid that out ahead of time. So that Hydra, they knew when it was coming out that it was either kill the goblins and the bugbear pushing it, or doing it. Now, what was interesting is they actually ended up killing the Hydra because they set a bonfire underneath it because it was a metal cage and literally cooked it in the cage. So, creative thinking gave them an EXP for killing a Hydra at second level. Plus, I needed them to level up a little bit faster. So, it's those kinds of things in your encounters where straight combat can get boring. If you have two players meeting from side to side and collapsing together, that's not so intense. If you want to add an aspect of suspense to your fights, give them something that if it happens, they know will make the battle harder. Okay? So, I hope you enjoyed it, guys. It's one of my favorite things to do in combat is to add that ticking time bomb where the players can defuse and defeat it. I hope you like it. I'll actually include some encounters later on that you will be able to use and have those in them. So we're hoping to have a bunch of encounters for you guys as well. But for the time being, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. We've got a ton of more DM tips and player tips.